Hilchos, Bechoros, Perek Shvi, the laws of the firstborn, chapter 7. The laws of the firstborn, as the Rambam told us in the beginning of these laws, include also Meiser Behema, the laws of the animal tithe that was done once a year, which we started to explore yesterday in detail. But yesterday the Rambam was more telling us the laws that relate to the animal itself, the animal that is the tithe, or what's allowed to be tithed. Today we get into the details of how to do it. How do you separate this tithe? We have in halacha another meiser, another tithe. Whenever you have produce, after you give 2% to the Kohen of Truma, you take 10% and you give it to the Levi. How do you take 10% and give it to the Levi? You simply look at your grain, you look at your pile, and you take 10% and that's it. But we're going to see today that with Meiser Behema, there's a whole different system. Torah dictates a very specific way how to separate this animal tithe. And it goes like this. It says that Rambam halacha aleph misha hayuloi asara tloim. Let's say somebody knows that he has only 10 sheep that were born this year, 10 new sheep. V'hifrish echad me'asara. He says, great. I know how to calculate a tenth. It's pretty easy. 10% of 10 is 1. So I'll just take 1 sheep, and that'll be meiser. Or hayulei meya v'hifrish asara le'meiser. Or he knows he has 100 sheep. I know this year was born to me only 100 new sheep. That's easy. How much is 10% of 100? 10. So he separates 10 for meiser. It says the Rambam ein elu meiser. You haven't done it right. That's not the tithe. The tithe is not simply to calculate 10% and take the 10%. There's a system. Rather, how do you do it? You go like this. You bring in all the sheep or all the calves to the pen. Because as we saw yesterday, this law only applies to cattle and sheep. It doesn't apply to any other kosher animals. So you're either going to have young sheep, like lambs, or you're going to have calves. You bring them all into the pen. You make a small doorway. So 2 shouldn't be able to go out together. It has to be very narrow. Only 1 could get out at a time. And you put the moms outside. Otherwise, how are you going to attract the kids to go out of the pen? So you put the moms outside, the hein goyos, and they moo. They make a sound. You see in the picture. The moms are outside the gate. The guy is with all the little calves in the pen. So they moo, they make their sound. So the lambs, pictures the calves here, it's lambs in the Rambam. The lambs should hear their voice and go towards them out of the pen. Shenemar, because the Torah says, it's up there in the verse on top of the screen, the tithe of the sheep and the cows is everyone that passes under the rod. Now the word yaver means it has to go on its own. You can't take it out with your hand. You can't lead the animals out of the pen. They have to go on their own out of the pen. So the mechanism, the trick to do this is to put the moms outside, and they now go towards them. And then, when they leave the pen, one after the other, with the rod, it's a stick he's holding there, you begin to count them. Maybe here's a better picture. Look at this one. He's holding the rod out, and they're passing by in the narrow exit way. And he begins to count them. He has to verbally count them. This is very rare. I don't think you find this almost anywhere else in the Rambam, where the Rambam says like numbers. Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalid, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Ches, Tes. You have to verbally say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And the one that comes out 10th, Bein Zachar, Bein Nekeva, whether it's male or female, Bein Tamim, Bein Balmum, whether it's blemished or perfect, unblemished, Soikre Besikra. You mark it with red paint. And you say, Harei zeh meiser, this is meiser. Even though if it's blemished, there's different laws as we learned yesterday. You're not going to bring it as a sacrifice. It doesn't matter. You put everything into the pen. The one that comes out 10th, that's the one by divine providence, that's the one that's meiser. Lo iskare besikra, if you didn't paint it with the red paint. V'lo minan b'shevet, or you didn't count them with the rod. They weren't, you weren't having the stick there and saying the numbers. Oisha minan revutzim oy oimdim, or you did count them, but you didn't have them walk. They were just crouching in the pen. All the calves are sitting there. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, number 10. Or they were standing. Point is, they were standing in place. They didn't move under the rod. Hare elu meiser, this is still meiser. Hoyelu menam asara v'kiddush asiri, hare ze meiser. The bottom line, the only essential thing is, you counted them in groups of 10, and you sanctified the 10th one. How you did it, ideally you should paint it with red paint. But if you didn't, you just declared it to be meiser, it's still meiser. Now, says the Rambam something very practical. Ein tzarich letzaref kol behema shenilda birshusei ledir echad. There's no need to bring all the animals that were born into your possession into one pen. Ela mitzaref kol eder va'eder levada. You could put every flock on its own. Now, this could lead to some leniencies, right? Because let's say, we're going to see later, let's say you have 15 animals here, 15 animals there. So if you put them all together, now you have 30, and you're going to end up with 3 animals meiser, right? Because every 10 will give you 1. But if you leave the 15 each on their own, we'll see in the end of today's chapter, you're only going to be obligated 1 from each. Because you only have to count to 10. Once you don't get to 10, that's it. The rest is just exempt, in most cases. So you'll end up saving sometimes. For example, he gives another example that Rambam says. Let's say even less. He had only 5 lambs born in Jerusalem, 5 lambs born in Akko. They don't combine, and they're all exempt from being tithed. Now, the Rambam says it's not a general license. How much space must there be between 2 groups, and they do combine? Shisha asar mil, 16 mil. A mil is about a mile, so let's call it 16 miles. If the 2 cities are within 16 miles of each other, then you do have to bring them together. So if you have 5 in Sherman Oaks and you have 5 in Studio City, you must combine them together. You must get them together. You must take 1 for Meiser. Gimel hayu shloisha adarim bein kol echad ve'echad shisha asar mil goes even more. Let's say you had 3 flocks. Between each one is 16 miles. Hare shloshtan mitzdarfin. They all come together. So you have a few here, a few 5 miles away, a few 5 miles after that. You got to bring them all together. Rambam gives an even better example. It says, Ketzad, look at this. Haya tisha mikan, v'tisha mikan, ve'echad ba'emtza. Let's say you have 9 here, 32 miles apart. And you have 1 sheep in the middle, which now breaks the space, 16.
You got that then.
They have to all come in to the pen. Now, granted, there's a total of 19. You're only going to end up with 1 meiser, because you're going to count to 10, and then you're only going to have 9 left, but still you don't know which one that might be. So they all have to come inside, and you must count them. Dalid, ein ma'asrin min atzayin ala bakar, v'lei min habakar ala atzayin. If you have, Hashem blessed you with new calves and new sheep, you cannot bring them together. You cannot tithe from sheep to cows and cows to sheep. Aval ma'asrin min hakvasim alo izim u'min ha'izim ala kvasim. But within sheep family, you can tithe from sheep to goats, from goats to sheep. Shenemar, because it says, same verse on top of the screen, the chol masar bakar v'tzoyin. All the tithing of cattle and sheep. Mashma kol tzoyin echad, which means that the entire sheep family is one. Sheshneim nikraim seh, bareim kimin echad. In Torah, they're both called seh. Seh could mean a sheep, seh could mean a goat, so therefore they can both be tithed together. Halacha hey, ein ma'asrim min haneladim b'shana zu, al haneladim b'shana acheres. Each year stands alone. You can't tithe calves and sheep that were born this year to take care of calves and sheep that were born in a different year. Same way when it comes to tithing of the agriculture, of produce. Whatever is grown in this year has to be tithed on itself. Whatever is grown in a different year has to be tithed on itself. Shenema, as it says, and we had this just the other day in the Shmini Atzeret reading of the Torah. He says, Shenemar, it says, Hayaytze asodeh, shana, shana. You must tithe the produce, what comes out of the field, year by year.
Is it time to ask, what is the fiscal year?
Yes, it's going to say it right now. Very good. What is the year? When does the year start? When does the year end? It's the perfect time to ask. But we'll see in a second. The Yerdoel, says the Rambam, it seems to me, Sheim iser behema mishana al shana, that if you did, by mistake or maybe on purpose, you tithed animals from one year to the next, Hadei ze meiser, it is considered to be meiser, mipnei chumras hakadashim, just to treat sacrifices strictly. Torah is never particular clearly when it comes to the animals to be year by year. We're learning it from this verse. This verse is by agricultural meiser. Over there it says clearly shana shana. We're extrapolating from there to tithe of the animals. But since it doesn't say clearly, if you did mix them up and you took the meiser, it's a meiser and you have to go bring it as a sacrifice. Now, what's the year? When does the year start? When does the year end? So actually, it's one of the few cases, it follows the calendar year, as we know it. Kol ha-meiladim be'echad b'tishrei ad esrim v'tisha be'elul. Here's a classic Jewish year. Even a leap year it includes. Here you have Tishrei, here you have Elul. So Tishrei, the first of Tishrei, all the way to the 29th of Elul, mitzdarfin. They're all combined to 1 year, u'me'asrin me'elu al elu, and you tithe from one to the other. But once you cross that line, noldu chamisha tlayim be'esrim v'tisha be'elul, v'chamisha be'echad b'tishrei. If you had 5 sheep born on the 29th day of Elul, last day of the year, and the next day, Rosh Hashanah, they're not even maybe 24 hours apart, these animals. 5 new animals were born, ein mitzdarfin. They don't combine. Different years. These 5 go into last year's group, these 5 go into next year's group. Yoldu told us, B'seich shnasan, if they gave birth within their first year of life. If anybody has some information on that, whether animals today give birth in their first year of life, I'd love to know. If you're watching online, put it in the comments. Can an animal, can a cow give birth in its first year? Let's say it does, okay? A calf is born on the 1st of Tishrei. By the time the 29th of Elul comes around, it's grown up, mated, it's pregnant, had a baby. Says the Rambam, Harehi ubita nichnasu madir liyisaser. It and its child go into the pen. They're both products of 1 year. They're both tithed in the same year. Halacha zayin. Consider this question. When it comes to agriculture, so until you take tithe, you cannot eat from that produce. Or I should, maybe more accurately, you can't eat a proper meal. You can snack on it, we saw it before. But it's basically, there's what's called tevel. Tevel means it's forbidden food until you take the tithe. With animals, it's not that way. The Rambam says, "Einat tloyim haneladim kamei hatevel she'asur lechol mimenu ad she'yaser." Newborn lambs are not like tevel grain, which it's forbidden to eat from until you tithe it, as we explained in its place. No. You can sell and slaughter whatever you want till you tithe. Whenever you choose to tithe, you must do it once a year. But when you do it, whatever animals you have, you bring it to the pen and you tithe it. Let's say now, it's the beginning of 5785. Yeah? All the holidays just finished. So now you have time to think. So now you go back to your field and you say, hey, where are all the calves and the sheep that were born in 5784? Take all the calves and sheep together and I tithe them. But 1 second, maybe 6 months ago, I sold one or I slaughtered one. Doesn't matter. As the year progresses, you can do whatever you want. When the time comes to tithe, now you tithe whatever you have. And when you tithe it, however many animals you have, you count them. And the 10th will be holy, it will be eaten properly, as we explained. Now, that is all the biblical law. Biblical law is that you can do whatever you want. Halacha Ches says that Rambam kavu chachamim shleisha zmanim b'shana l'maiser behema. The rabbis came about and they said 3 times. U'mishiyagia zman mehen osur le'limkar elishchet ad she'yaser. The rabbi said, once these times come, you cannot do anything with your flock until you tithe. V'im shachat is a mutter. After the fact, if you did it, it's okay. But ideally, you should pause and tithe at that time. Ve'elu heina shleisha zman. And when are the 3 times? They're actually very much related to the 3 biblical holidays of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. The 3 times are, says the Rambam, V'im chamisha asar kedem ha-Pesach, Uv'im chamisha asar kedem ha-Tzeres, Uv'im chamisha asar kedem ha-Chag. 15 days before Passover, 15 days before Shavuot, 15 days before Sukkot. V'chol zman me'elu nikra goyden meiser behema. These 3 times are called the goyden, the storehouse of animal tithe. And once 2 weeks hits before Pesach, you cannot do anything until you take all your animals into the pen and tithe it. It turns out that you say, Shahagrami shel meiser behema b'yem achrin mechedesh adar, u'b'yem shleishim v'chamisha misfiras ha'omer, u'b'yem achrin mechedesh elu. if you want the calendar dates, it'll be the last day of the month of Adar, because you have 14 days of Nisan before Pesach, and then one day before that, 15 days, the last day of Adar. Either will be 29 or 30, depending on the year. Today's calendar is always 29, but in those days it could have been 30. Day 35 of the counting of the Omer. There's no calendar date for Shavuos, even though today, again, we have a set calendar of 6th of Sivan, but in those times it all depended on when the court decided the calendar, how long was Nisan, how long was Iyar. So 35 days into Sfiras HaOmer is 15 days before day 50 of Shavuos. And the last day of Elul, which is also, again, you have 14 days in Tishrei before Sukkot, so one day before, in the last day of Elul. It says the Rambam, why did the rabbis establish the times, specifically in these days? Very smart move. They wanted animals to be available for those that come to the holiday. Think about it. You live in Israel, you're anyways coming for Pesach. You're anyways coming for Shavuos, you're anyways coming for Sukkot. If you tithe your animals 15 days before, you're going to be coming to Jerusalem with those animals. Now what happens? Now you have animals available that people that come from other places in Israel can buy towards their holiday sacrifices. Because as we saw in the laws of Chagiga, you could use Meiser Behema animals for some of the holiday sacrifices. And therefore, you're creating now economic opportunity, some more supply for people that come to the holidays. Now, even though it's permitted to sell, before you take the tithe, as we explained, people would hold back from selling until they do the tithe, do the mitzvah, already take care of it. Therefore, once you tithe and bring it to Jerusalem, you have available animals. Halacha tes, kind of like an intro for tomorrow's more complex cases. Let's say you brought in all your sheep, all your cattle into a pen. And you began to count, and every 10th one you're sanctifying. And then there remains in the pen less than 10. Here, you have 3-4 sheep over here. You can leave them for the next time. Because really there was 3 times a year when you were doing this. Yeah. Right? So these are all still part of the same year. You can leave them to the next time. And they'll combine with the ones that are born in the next months. And they're all going to be tithed in one time, the next one. Even though you know that there's going to be leftovers in the number, you know you only have 13 sheep. So what's the point? Maybe put 3 aside. No. You must bring everything into the pen. Whatever remains by divine providence. Hashem will dictate which one goes out first, which one goes out second. You, on your responsibility, is to bring all your animals in and let the numbers decide what's the 10th.